Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to introduce humble speech. Now, remember that in Korean, people will speak differently to each other based on several factors, and this is what's known as politeness levels. So one of the most important things that people will base the way that they speak with someone else on will be their age. So someone who's younger will speak to someone who's older with more respect and to show more politeness. In the Korean language, people will show extra respect toward their elders. Older people, however, are not required to use that same formal speech toward younger people. Next, a person's social rank will also affect their politeness. So a student would speak more formally to a teacher, such as by using the 으세요 form when talking about them, but the teacher would probably not use that honorific form back to the student. A friend would speak casually with another friend of the same age or younger, and an adult would probably speak less formally to a small child, or even casually. And a company representative would speak extra politely over the phone with a client. And finally, the situation is important too. In a more formal situation, such as if you're giving a speech, you would speak, of course, more formally. Before we get into humble speech, we also need to talk a little bit more about honorific verbs. Now, in addition to the 으시다 ending that we've learned, some verbs can also change completely into honorific verbs. Here are a few of those. When you're speaking honorifically, instead of saying 먹다 about someone else, use 드시다, which also means to eat. This conjugates as 드세요. For example, 뭘 드시고 싶으세요? What do you want to eat? Instead of saying that someone else exists with 있다, use 계시다 to exist. This conjugates as 계세요. For example, 아버지는 어디 계세요? Where is father? And instead of saying someone does not exist with 없다, use 안 계시다 to not exist. For example, 선생님은 지금 여기 안 계세요. The teacher is not here now. And finally, instead of saying that someone sleeps with 자다, use 주무시다 to sleep. This conjugates as 주무세요. For example, 안녕히 주무세요. Sleep well, or good night. And again, honorific speech is only for other people, so don't say these verbs when you're talking about yourself. So now let's introduce humble speech and how that relates with honorific speech. First, honorific speech is one way of showing extra respect towards someone who you're talking about. And you can think of honorific speech like you're putting the person who you're talking about above you up on a pedestal by showing extra honor toward them. For example, 선생님도 좋아하세요. The teacher also likes it. Humble speech, however, shows the speaker's own humility. And by doing that, it also shows extra respect toward another person. So while honorific speech is kind of like you're raising the other person above, you can think of humble speech as if you are lowering yourself down in front of that person. So honorific speech is kind of like raising them up, and humble speech is kind of like lowering yourself down. Because of that, honorific speech and humble speech will often be used together since they kind of serve the same purpose of showing extra respect towards someone else. So now let's talk about using humble speech. You can do that by just using humble verbs when you're talking about someone else. And there are only 2 humble verbs that we need to learn. The first one is, instead of saying 보다, to see, you can say 보다. This would conjugate as 보요. You might also see 뵙다, to see, which is even a bit more humble. 뵙다 also conjugates as 보요. For example, 내일 선생님을 뵙고 싶어요. I want to see the teacher tomorrow. Note that 뵙다 here is being used about yourself, not that the teacher is seeing something. So in this way, you are lowering yourself or making yourself more humble by saying that you will see the teacher tomorrow. 제가 언제 뵐 수 있어요? When can I see you? And next, instead of the verb 주다, which means to give, use the verb 드리다, which also means to give. This conjugates as 드려요. For example, 선생님에게 선물을 드리고 싶어요. I want to give the teacher a present. This is you giving the present to the teacher. 어머님에게 안 드렸어요? You didn't give it to your mother? So those two verbs are important, but there are also a couple of particles that you'll want to use when using humble speech or honorific speech. The first one is whenever you're saying to or from, normally 에게 or 에게서 or ante or 안테서, you can instead use 게, to or from. For example, 이걸 선생님에게 드리고 싶었어요. This could become 이걸 선생님께 드리고 싶었어요. I wanted to give this to you, teacher. And instead of the topic marker, 은 or 는, use 께서는. 우리 할아버지는 미국에서 일하세요. This could become 우리 할아버지께서는 미국에서 일하세요. My grandfather works in America. And instead of the subject marker 이 or 가, use 께서. 선생님이 지금 바빠요. This could become 선생님께서 지금 바쁘세요. The teacher is busy now. And there are also some more nouns that you'll want to use when using humble or honorific speech. The first one is actually one that we've been using this whole time. 저, meaning I or me, is actually a humble noun that lowers yourself down when you're talking up to someone else. And here's another one. Instead of saying 우리 for we or us, you can use 저희. 저희 is a humble noun as well. For example, 저희는 선생님을 만날 수 없어요. We cannot meet the teacher. And when you're talking about someone else's house, instead of saying 집 for house or home, you can also use 댁, which is a more polite way to refer to another person's house. For example, while your house is just 집, a grandparent's house or a teacher's house could be 댁. So you can have this sentence, 우리 할머니 댁에 놀러 오세요. Come to hang out at my grandmother's house. There are also other useful nouns like this, and we'll learn them in later lessons. So let's do some conversation practice. Here we have two people, 수현, speaking with a 직원, an employee. First, 수현 on the phone says, 여보세요? Now, 여보세요 is a polite way to say hello when you're answering the phone when you don't know who is on the other line. 네, 고객님. Yes, customer. 뭘 주문하고 싶으세요? What would you like to order? 샴푸와 비누를 주문하고 싶어요. I want to order shampoo and soap. 언제 받을 수 있어요? When can I get it? 네, 내일 보내드릴 거예요. Yes, I will send it to you tomorrow. Notice that the employee is using humble speech towards 수현. Since both 드리다 and 주다 mean to give, you can also use 드리다 in the same way as 주다 after a conjugated verb when using humble speech. So this part here, 보내드릴 거예요, has the same meaning as 보내줄 거예요, but is humble speech. 감사합니다. Thank you. 빨리 보내주세요. Please send it to me quickly.
여보세요? 네, 고객님. 뭘 주문하고 싶으세요? 샴푸와 비누를 주문하고 싶어요. 언제 받을 수 있어요? 네, 내일 보내드릴 거예요. 감사합니다. 빨리 보내주세요.
Now, before we go, I have some notes. First, your Korean is not going to sound rude if you misuse humble speech or honorific speech as a beginner. For example, if you were to say 집 instead of 댁 or 먹다 instead of 드시다, well, they're going to understand what you were trying to say and they're not going to be offended. After all, you're still learning. And native Korean speakers understand that speaking polite and proper Korean, including honorific speech and humble speech and casual speech and all of the politeness levels, takes hard work and practice. And they'll still feel very appreciative if you can just use their language correctly at all. Also remember to never use honorific speech when you're talking about yourself, or humble speech when you're saying someone else is doing something if it's not appropriate. These are only used to show extra respect toward other people, so try to be careful when using them. And finally, note that the expression 안녕히 계세요, goodbye, which we learned in a very early lesson, comes from the adverb 안녕히, meaning peacefully or well, and the honorific verb 계시다, to exist, and literally means be well or be, exist at peace. So in this lesson, we learned more about honorific speech, and we also got an introduction to humble speech. So practice both of these concepts before moving on, and I'll see you again in the next lesson. 그럼 다음에 또 봐!